My name's Steve Gohl. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships for Scalefusion. Welcome to the Scalefusion Partners Perspective podcast, insights from the ecosystem. And I'm super excited to have these two guys here with me today. So we've got Matt from Turnpoint and Chuck from Motus. This is going to be a great conversation and a little bit unique from what we've done before. Anybody that's seen our episodes in the past have been kind of featuring a Scalefusion partner of ours and talking through some scenarios. I'm thrilled to have Matt on as an end user customer and Chuck from our partner Motus to talk through an actual implementation that happened and really round out that whole conversation. So before we dive into it, guys, can you give a more in-depth intro to each of you, what your role is and the company you work for? Matt, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'm Matt Horton. I'm a Senior Director of Applied Technology at Turnpoint Services. Purchase really large plumbing and HVAC electrical companies, and we consolidate them under one platform, which is Turnpoint. And then we kind of transplant best practices and work our best to consolidate things and save money along the way.
Chuck, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for inviting us both here. So my name is Chuck Serapilio. I am the Vice President of Sales for Motus. I represent the MMS, or Mobility Management Solutions, part of Motus. And I've been with them for a little bit over a year and a half now, but been within the MMS space for just about 24 years. So pleasure to be here. It's great to have Matt with us too. So looking forward to a great podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, guys, for being here. So Matt, you're kind of going to be the star of the show because it's your story. So I'm gonna be asking you a lot of questions, but
That's not a good thing.
Can you fill us in on kind of what was the scenario? What were the challenges that you were up against in your role and some of the things that Turnpoint was dealing with? So set the stage on what you guys were trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So I've been with Turnpoint about 2.5 years now. And when I first got here, that was one of the first things that I noticed because I came from the mobility space at my previous role. And one of the first things I noticed was we really weren't centralized. We have about 60 brands underneath us, and each of those brands were managing their own carrier, right? They were buying their own phones. There was really no centralized process. It was kind of spread out everywhere. And due to that, we were having a lot of phones just walk out the door, right? And matter of fact, the process was so disconjugate that it was like we were having people pay for cell phones for years that weren't even we didn't even have them anymore, right? Wow. So people would walk out the door and they get a free cell phone for 3 years, right? Or whatever. And so that was one of the first things I did. I started looking at how do I consolidate this, right? I know that we're a big company, so obviously with buying power, and Motus's help and a really great company called iBills helped us too. We negotiated a contract with AT&T and T-Mobile, and just kind of started from there, working through the process, right? One of the great things about Motus is they help us with the allocation, right? So one of the big ways that we manage this is when it was 60 brands managing their own thing, they would turn it in on their P&L as a line item on their P&L. Well, now we've got kind of like the one throat to choke scenario, right? We get one bill and we can allocate that bill to all of their P&Ls, and it makes it a whole lot easier to manage and track everything, right? Chuck, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Matt, you did a great job at kind of outlining what were the challenges. One of the things that we had talked about early on, as you guys were looking at this, was the security of those devices and utilizing Scalefusion on a larger scale. When you came into this environment at Turnpoint, what was that structure from a security standpoint? Was it even in place, or was it?
Well, It was, again, very difficult to manage because we had, a lot of our companies had MDMs. I mean, they were thinking about the security aspect of
Mhm.
it. Were they managing it actively? And all of them, no. Some just didn't even have them at all. Right. So, from a security aspect, the bigger we've gotten, we're getting on, we're on one platform, and, everybody works off of their phone. We call the phones
Mhm.
the cash registers of our business. Right. And so, putting them all under one MDM and being able to build policies and, kind of take more control of the security aspect is also a huge, like, that was just, I would say that would be a top two reason why we did this. Right.
Mhm.
But, at first it was really difficult because with Scale Fusion, the way we had to kind of do it before was go brand by brand by brand. And, they didn't have Apple Business Manager installed on their phones. And so you had to kind of go through this other process of setting them up. And it was a little more difficult. Right. But the way we set it up now is like the phone comes provisioned, ready to go. All they have to do is sign in with their, Microsoft login, and they're off to the races. The policies download to the phone. It's beautiful.
Where
Yeah,
were you guys in terms of compliance before? So if you were to look at the holistic environment, were you less than 50% compliant on an MDM, and where are you guys now?
We were 100% compliant now. I
Great.
mean, everybody, when I say compliant, I mean, there's obviously reports and things that we have to manage, right?
Right.
Location services being on, and, sending out notifications like, hey, you know, can you please turn your location services back on? We use that. You know what I mean? But I get it. That's the same struggle that every company deals with,
Sure.
right? So, but yeah, it was definitely less than 50%.
yeah. I think that from my background of knowing what you guys were up against, there was definitely some financial reasons to make a move, some efficiencies, some security just postures that needed improvement. But can you talk a little bit more about how big a shift that really was? Because it sounds like you had really 60 independent,
Mm-hmm.
companies doing their own thing. And how do you get that kind of alignment into one unified management structure?
Yeah, so it's a lot of analysis, right? Because if I was going to give advice, I would say don't pull the trigger on anything until you fully understand the scope of what you're doing, right? Because, like, number one, what we did was we took a look at all of our device. We aggregated all of our bills and all of our stuff, right? We had to get admin access to 60 different portals, right? And kind of dig through. And then we immediately noticed that we had, like, I think it was like $65,000 a month in unused data lines, right? Like, we were just paying for lines that hadn't been used in a really long time. So that, like, step one was like, let's get those canceled, you know?
Yeah.
And that was a big win for the business, right? And then, once we did that, we just really started kind of aggregating a giant spreadsheet of all of our lines by company. And, so we had, like, Verizon and AT&T and T and, like, all these kind of obscure companies too, right? And we went down and had to validate all of these lines were actually good and actually active, which took a minute, right? We had to go brand by brand by brand to do that. So once we got that list validated, it really let us know, like, how many we needed to order, how many phones we needed to order, how much, what was going to be our license count with Scale Fusion, the whole thing, right? So that was really, I would say, one of the bigger lifts was really just validating the data lines across 60 brands.
Yeah, and I think you probably mentioned, I mean, that total number count is pretty large. That's I think north of
We're
6,000 devices, right?
It's north of seven, actually.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, it's we set up a bunch of meetings, and it was like 3, 4, 5 meetings a week with each of these brands, and then chasing them down is difficult sometimes too because everybody's busy, right? But we finally got it done. And look, it wasn't 100%. We knew it wasn't going to be 100%. But I believe we got close enough to where, we feel like we didn't over order, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit, and again, I want to take this from the stance of maybe somebody else that's in your shoes and trying to, pull off a large transformation like this. So talk a little bit more about the logistics of selecting, like, decision criteria for an MDM, how to implement that, how to roll that out, and how that ties into the consolidation of all these brands, the agreements with carriers, the selection of devices. I think all of that really ties together. And
Yeah.
how did you determine to go about that, or the steps you took?
Well, look, we're still evolving as a company, right? We grew very quickly from like 2017 to last year. Went from 200 million to like 1.5 billion, right? Or something like that.
Wow.
And that's an extremely fast growth path, right? For us right now, and when we were looking at the MDM, there's really like a couple of major factors. Obviously, we have a lot of devices, right? So price is a concern, but it's not the top concern. Security is one of the top concerns. Being able to load it and provision the phone prior to deployment, because you're not going to get 7,000 people to walk through a difficult process, right?
Yeah.
You want it to be really easy, and Scalefusion made it easy. I mean, literally, all they got to do is sign in with the same email and same login that they do every day for all of their Microsoft stuff, right? Also, being able to brick a device or locate a device that's been lost. Those are all key factors, right? A lot of MDMs do that. I find it particularly easy with Scalefusion, right? Um, you know, Location services. There's a lot of data too that we're kind of looking at like long term, right? How can we start to track people? Not track people, but you get what I mean. Like if we want to look at routing and look at some breadcrumb data, I think that's available, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah.
The logistics behind all this, aggregating all of these brands under one umbrella, right? You know, Part of it is making it really easy for them, right? Like, you don't want it to be this super complicated, super long thing that they have to do. Because look, all of our guys, they're coming in to sit down at a desk and transfer their phones over, right? They have one set of phone, they got to move to another, they got to get all their stuff off of it. The big one's always pictures. Everybody wants to keep their pictures, right? And then you got to go, well, you can't download 8 gigs in 10 minutes, right? So you got to make some concessions there. And we talk about all of that on the front end, right? But I think the key for us was really alignment, right? We were really diligent in explaining from beginning to end with each of our brands exactly how this was going to go. And then we piloted it. We went to a couple of, like, one of our brands, Roth, amazing. Like, they were really well put together, but they have a large group of people. So we were like, let's test it with a large group. Let's test it with a small group. And we learned a lot of really good stuff along the way. Like, bring in your top revenue generating technicians in the morning early and get them out the door, right? We didn't think about that. Things like that, right? But we ended up, we built a really detailed job aid. When I say detailed, though, it was simple enough to follow. Like, step one, here's a
Yeah.
picture, here's an arrow, right? And then, so like when it was time to actually deploy, we would bring in groups of like 30 people, 25, 30 people, and we were in and out in about 30 minutes for each group, right? And I think that had to do with all of the pre-work that we put in to developing these job aids. And then we also had PowerPoints that we were walking through, with the brands before. We kind of gave them the play-by-play about what it's going to look like when we get there. And then we followed that. And then, we caught some things too, like, really important to put the Wi-Fi up on a whiteboard, so everybody knows here's the Wi-Fi password, right? Because that first group, yeah, it probably would have been even quicker, if we'd had thought of some stuff like that. But we just implemented that, right? So
What was your time? So it's a big environment, right? I think over 7,000 devices. Once you got the plan kind of laid out, and then you started to roll this out to those business units, how long did that take you to do that?
so I did this once before at another company, and it took us about 8 months to get all the way out. And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6,500 devices then. It was actually from beginning to end, we got it all done in about 90 days.
This
But again,
particular transition.
yeah.
Wow.
Right. So
that's amazing.
I think everybody's pretty happy about that. We had a lot of people saying we'll be doing this for the next 2 years. That's like, if I'm doing this in 2 years, somebody shoot me. There's no way,
Is there, so again, that's a small window of time, right? That 90 days, when you really think about it, is not, and for the brands that you have that are spread out, right? Getting all that information and being able to do that. What would you say are the top 3 things, going back to what Steve said, if a company of your size is looking to make this kind of a change, what are the top 3 things that they need to do in preparation to make sure that they can get this done in that 90-day window?
Yeah, I would say number 1 is, like I said at the beginning, understand your scope. Like, you dig deep into the data and really understand how many it is, right? If I had to say number 2, I would say we over communicated. Like, we probably wore these guys out, because we knew there was a lot of steps here, right? Because it's not just like, hey, everybody, here's a new phone. It's really not like, it's hey, sign out of your old device, put it in this box. Here's a new device, sign into it, make sure everything. Now, hey, guess what? Now the port's got to happen. So you got to wait for that and make sure your SIM activates, right? And then once you've done that, you need to go sign into all your stuff, right? And of course, just like every company, passwords are difficult, right? So you got to have somebody like on call with your support desk to be able to help people through the password problem. I would say that might be number 1, because we called our support desk over and over and over again. We had somebody dedicated there waiting on us that could reset a password like immediately, right? And that wasn't just for Microsoft. I mean, it was for our other stuff too. Service Titan, the other applications that we use. So understand your data, over communicate, and then like I said, the other. Pause that. Let me back that up.
So now that you guys are done, right, and this transition is complete, what's been the feedback from the users, right? What's their feedback on Scalefusion? What's their feedback on now, the managers of these, I guess, business units that were doing it independently, now they're part of a larger group? What's been that feedback?
Well, actually, we did something a little different than I think other projects have done in our company, right? We really paid attention to the fact that our general managers are really busy. They're trying to run multi-million-dollar businesses. Not to mention they're getting bombarded a lot by different projects and different implementations, right? Because you can imagine, our core, belief here is that we can take the best things from other companies and transplant them across 60 different environments, right? And so, like I said, they're getting bombarded. So what we did was we tried our best to kind of skip over the general manager and work with people at a lower level, right? So we kept them updated and over communicated with them, and some of them really wanted to be super involved, but for the most part we jumped over our general managers and worked with people in the brands to kind of open up or keep some capacity for the general manager, right? So the feedback has been I think really great. I think it's one of the smoothest projects that we've run, and I'm not just saying that because it's mine, I promise. I mean, getting 7,500 or 7,000 devices deployed in 90 days with very little, we haven't heard any real hiccups, right? Had a few things on billing here and there, because the previous carrier, I won't speak any names here, but they, if you don't watch out, this is something really to watch out for. If you're moving from one carrier to another, we had a lot of fraudulent charges that were showing up on our older bills, right? Like, because you cancel a bill, or you cancel with a carrier, and there's early termination fees, there's device buyout fees, and things like that. So it gets really muddy. And I'm not saying they did it on purpose. I'm just saying we had to pay attention to it because it was significant, right? But other than that, the feedback's been awesome. We went really quick, really smooth. Didn't bother the GMs too bad, right? Got all of the technicians in and out as quickly as we possibly could. I had a guy that was helping me with this guy named Greg Gustafson, really great project manager and really involved. And he was flying around the country. We had a couple of different teams that were flying around the country to make sure everything went smooth. And then the brands that were pretty organized or smaller, we did virtually, right? To kind of, save on some of the cost of travel and whatnot too. But it was relatively easy.
That's awesome. And Matt, what was I mean, we talked about the impact on the businesses themselves, or those 60 brands, and, the technicians are getting a new phone, and now it's managed, and there's, security layers in place and management, efficient management. But what other business impacts? I know we've focused on Scalefusion, which I love, but there's a lot of other things happening in the background that I know you and Motus were working together on, and some pretty heavy lifts too. But what was the business impact, or some of those other things to factor in that you guys were working on?
That's the main reason, right? Is to, use our buying power to save as much money as we can while we gain more security and more, more ways to drive compliance and manage our fleet, right? Year one, we're looking at saving about $2.4 million. That's from all of the credits. Because, one of the things we negotiated in was that we got a device refresh, right? We had a lot of people out. We had people on like iPhone SEs. I don't even know how they worked, honestly. But, we refreshed our entire fleet of devices. Everybody got brand new iPhone, 14s and 9th and 10th gen iPads, right? So the impact year one's about 2.4 million. And then year over year after that, it's going to end up being around $1.1 million that we save annually on that.
That's
really,
incredible.
yeah. I was shocked. I didn't expect it to be that big. But again, right now, if you think about like the way the carriers are operating now, there's really not any, market, right? Like the market is saturated. There's no new customers, right? So they're all fighting with each other to take each other's customers, right? And I think, we understood that going in, thanks to Motus. Motus, like I said, introduced us to iBills. iBills really went like, crazy on the negotiating side. And I think they got us. Matter of fact, I'll tell you this. I was in the industry before. I get calls from people that have kind of heard about this. Like, how did you do that? Right. So very, very impactful.
And there's probably more calls to come.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Maybe that's a question as well. Like, how did you guys get connected? How did you find Motus, or what was your selection, like select criteria to select them as a partner to help implement this?
Well, actually, I started with Google, and then I recognized Motus because of they helped us with the last transition at my previous company. It was kind of fortuitous, right? Like I had actually worked with Jennifer, who works with Chuck, on the previous project in my last role. So, and it was totally unintentional, to be honest. But again, I think it was relatively easy. And here's kind of the same thing. And I'll tell you the good thing about Motus is like I said, the organization and the allocation piece and tracking the spending is really difficult in the first like 3 or 4 months, right? Because you not only are you paying off old bills, but you're also getting credits for new line additions. Like if you negotiate your contract right, you're going to either get credits for new phones or early termination fee credits. Like our current provider will pay off the ETFs and whatever, but they do it in the form of credits. Very difficult to track. And it was a little rocky at first, which is to be expected. But then, probably 2 months in, we were really solid. And I think that's, if you don't get that right, there's really no point.
Yeah, absolutely. Chuck, what would you any other advice? I mean, we heard from Matt's side on kind of the steps that they took to help implement this from the Motus perspective. What's your advice to somebody similar in Matt's situation? Like how do you guys typically go about starting that process?
Yeah, I think Matt laid it out pretty well, right? So you start with the billing aspect of things, right? Because that's the most impactful. That's what everybody sees, and then you build that plan from there. And I think, you know, that is one thing that we should never overlook is the plan. And a really good plan has it documented, right? Has your workflows, has your races, who's responsible for what. And I think a lot of times enterprises enter into this kind of project and there's the one big step because they're all looking at the goal line, right? We're all looking at making this big transition. We're going to save some money. You got to reverse engineer that whole thing and really, really partner and build out a working process where everybody knows what their role is and everybody can be held accountable to the role that they play. And then it's about communication. It's about having those weekly meetings. I think right now with Turnpoint, we still have weekly meetings with them. And we are for in some part completed with that transition, but it's really important to continue that engagement because there's the after it's completed. Now, what's the feedback? But I know with Turnpoint in the beginning, we spent a lot of time partnering and collaborating with you folks at Scalefusion and really making a plan that was going to work for all parties included. And then once we all agree, and I think that's a big thing, right? Everybody talks about plans, and all of a sudden the project starts. And then everybody's like, well, did we agree on this plan? So I think the one thing that we did well is we worked out the plan and then we all agreed on the plan. And once we agreed on that, we then put it forward. And I attribute that a lot to Matt and having done this before in such a big environment. And again, the timelines that we had were, in my experience, that was a pretty condensed time frame. And so to be able to pull that off really is attributed to the plan that was built, right? And
Yeah.
making sure that we could follow it, manage it, adapt when needed, and then continuing to move forward. So, I think for anybody embarking on this, you got to think about the plan. You got to think about where you currently are today, where you want to end up, and how do you build a plan, and then make sure everybody agrees on that plan before you start this project.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you another thing that is so important. He's really right. Like I'm a foundation guy, right? Like I'm always like, let's just start with the fundamental concept here of what we're trying to do, and let's build a really good foundation and make sure we've thought of all of the high level stuff, and then you kind of build success factors around that, right? But I tell you one thing that we did in the middle. Well, I guess it was about week one. I realized, like, you know what? We really need to be tracking these implementations across the board. I mean, every phone that gets installed, right? So we built this kind of spreadsheet, huge spreadsheet, and everybody on our team owned a column, right? And it was required every day. These are the numbers that you got to enter, right? So by doing that, though, it helped us catch a lot of things that otherwise would have probably slipped through the cracks, right? Brand X has 15 more phones than they actually need, right? Well,
Yeah.
over here, this brand has got 15 less. Let's move those over, right? As opposed to, if we didn't know, we would have just bought 15 more phones, right? And that's a 3-year commitment. So having a way to track every single phone that is going out the door sounds a lot more daunting than it really is. You just got to sit down and think about it. But tracking those things, tracking how many ports were done, tracking how many things are registered in Scalefusion versus how many we ship to the brand, and then having a mechanism to communicate with those brands like, okay, look, you're missing 10 phones have not registered in Scalefusion. This is how we're tracking our equipment. We need those to be entered, right? Having those kind of mechanisms in place around that tracking is, it was key for us.
Yeah. One question I wanted to touch on as well, like we've talked a lot about like what the problem was, what you're trying to accomplish, how, the end result, we're saving all this money and we've got these brand new phones deployed and managed. Um, is that the end? Or how do you view this project? I mean, I think a lot of times we look at it as like, this is a project, we deploy it, we're done. But I kind of already know the answer that this is an ongoing thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Maybe you could talk more about that from both perspectives, not just Scalefusion. It's not meant to be just that, but I mean, obviously everything that you guys are doing with Motus and how you continue to evolve this, this deployment and the, get the true ROI and value out of this shift.
Well, so I'll tell you one thing for sure. We one of the key selling points for Motus for us was that it's like a one-stop shop for anything mobility, right? Not only do they handle our bill allocation, but they handle support, right? They can handle the MDM too, pushing policies or pushing down applications, things like that, right? So one of the big features for us was being able to tell every brand, hey, look, any problem that you have with a cell phone or an iPad or whatever, you call this telephone number or you hop into this portal, right? And they'll handle it for you. And that's huge for us, right? Because now we've got a central mechanism for not only phone ordering and iPad ordering and all of that, but we've got, if there's a memory problem on the device, right? Like Motus can help you with that. So having that kind of centralized support mechanism without having to stand that up on our own, one is a huge, cost savings, right? So moving forward though, there's a lot to do. I mean, it isn't just like, all right, the phones are out, right? We're building workflows around support. We're building kind of different protocols around like device ordering and it's difficult, right? Because we can't really have a centralized, like if somebody leaves the company, we can't get the phone back, right? Because of the way we allocate. So all of our phones, if someone leaves, they have to stay in the brands, right? And they're active or whatever, because you're still paying for that. It's a 3-year commitment. So we're building workflows around things like, all right, well, if someone leaves, how can we use Scalefusion and our HR file with Motus to notify Motus that, hey, there's an open phone line here, right?
Yeah.
And if one of these phone lines, let's say one of the phones walks off, well, that doesn't mean we order a new phone, right? Like if one of the phones walks off, we brick that phone and we port the number into, a different phone. So all of these workflows are kind of being built out, and I'm 100% sure, just like any process, they're going to be clunky at first, and then we'll just identify the gaps and continue to fix until we have something that's so smooth, you don't even think about it.
Nice. Yeah, I think that starting point was the consistency and uniformity of having everything under one management platform and a standardized device too, right? I mean, I think you mentioned you had devices, really old ones or, outdated things and stuff like that, like you said, the foundations or those building blocks are really important. And it sounds like you guys have taken one step and now you can build on those workflows and everything else.
Absolutely. We continue to learn every day because, there's a lot more than just managing the phones, right? Like you have to stay on top of things like the iOS version. You got to make sure that all of the applications that you work with the new iOS version, and that's not really on us because we deal with like a lot of cloud, vendors or whatever, but we're building processes around that. Building processes around how do we request a new application, right? Because there's all kinds of stuff that comes out, right? That can help your business. As AI and all of that stuff comes online, I'm sure that's all getting added to the phones left and right too, right? So like you got to figure out what are the processes and what are the things and the rules that you're willing to accept, so that when people need help, you can quickly give it to them, right?
Yeah.
One
Well,
of the
I think
other things that we wanted to make sure that Matt had was a replicatable process because, as Matt indicated, right, that company is growing and they're going to continue to grow. And so one of the things that we collectively wanted to make sure of was that whatever we put in place, that if they go buy a new brand, that could be easily adapted to bring that new brand in compliance with Turnpoint's current rules of engagement. And again, I think that that goes back to a plan, right? So that whole plan was put in place with the understanding that they have goals as an organization to continue that growth pattern, and we needed to make it easy for them to bring in a new organization and transition them into the Scalefusion environment, into the Motus environment, into the new carrier plans, and making sure that we had those things all built together, because we did, that could be a cog in the wheel, right? When you acquire a new company, is
Mhm.
that major transition of, well, we used to do it this way. Well, now you're going to do it this way, but make sure that you have that plan for them ready to go. And that helps for the adoption of those organizations into the Turnpoint family. So
Absolutely. That's a great point, Chuck. The truth is, when we acquire a new brand, there's a giant list of things that they have to do, right? And switching carriers is probably not at the top of that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So whatever we do, it's got to be easy and adaptable, right? And so that's why I think it's really important, if you're going to roll something like this out, you once you get something that works, don't try new things, right? Like, get really good at what works, and that's what we did. We replicated the same process across 60 brands. Of course, you run into different things, right? And you got to kind of adapt, but it was the same process, same communication schedule, all of that, very consistent, from the very beginning through the end. And now, we buy a new brand. I really don't think it's going to be a huge lift, right? Matter of fact, again, we skipped over most of the GMs that run these brands, right? We worked with people in our locations, right? That mobility is not their job, right? And they have another day job to do, but we worked with those folks to kind of get this thing out the door and alleviate some of that capacity. Like I said, for the GMs.
Yeah, I love that. It's designed for growth. I mean, you guys are a growth company and it's designed for the future and not just today. That's awesome. Well, as we get ready to wrap up, we're almost really at the end of our time. I'm going to give you both any last word, two things I'm going to ask you. So, any last thoughts on anything we talked about? I thought it was a phenomenal conversation today. So, any final thoughts? And how can somebody get a hold of you guys if they wanted to? What's the best way to reach out or connect?
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, no, I would just like to thank Matt for the opportunity to work with him and with you guys at Scale Fusion and bringing this whole thing together and making a successful project. So, um, I think again, the one thing that I would say is plan. Make sure that you plan appropriately for the project that you have, and make sure that everybody knows what their role is and hold them accountable for the role that they've been assigned. Outside of that, to reach me, you can just you can search Motus .com, and you can find my contact information. Steve, I don't know if you're going to have that available for folks as well, but love to talk to anybody that's out there wanting to learn more about this and some of those project tasks that we did for Turnpoint here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd like to second that and thank both of you guys for the partnership and and the opportunity here to speak on this today. This has been a awesome experience for me. Um, Again, I second also what Chuck says, is planning, and planning is so important. But also, I would say, once you get into it, tracking everything in a centralized location and looking at it every single day. I really do believe that was a huge key to our success, right? So plan, build a foundation, and then stack that on top of having all of your people that are accountable to either a metric or a number, or a column on a spreadsheet, right? That lets you know where you're at exactly in the project. And again, holding them accountable to do that every day was it was tough at first, right? So, but yeah, really enjoyed this. Thank you for everything.
Absolutely. And just in case somebody wants to find you, Matt, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, you can just hit me on LinkedIn at Matt Horton at Turnpoint Services.
Awesome.
That's probably the best way.
Sounds good. You never know. There might be a brand looking to get acquired and get wrapped
Yeah.
into the Turnpoint family. So, well, I just want to thank both of you guys for being on today. Great conversation. great partnership. Again, can't thank you enough for including us, including Scalefusion as part of it. We know we're one piece, an important piece, but there's a lot of moving parts, which I think it's super valuable to have this conversation and share how everything works together and how the ecosystem comes together to solve these enterprise problems. So thank you all for tuning in. Thanks, Matt and Chuck, for being here, and have a great day.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.